The galaxy was not free, it was silent under the shadow of a single empire that had ruled for thousands of years. An empire so old that most races had forgotten a time before it. Their flags flew on every world, their fleets filled the skies, and their laws pressed on every colony that dared to grow. Their rulers believed themselves eternal, laughing at the thought that anyone could ever rise against them, for they had crushed rebellion after rebellion. And whenever a new power tried to stand, it was burned away like dust in the wind. Yet even as their fleets patrolled the stars, whispers began to flow, small and faint, spoken in the corners of markets, in the quiet of slave camps, in the lonely watches of freighters, whispers of something moving at the far edge of known space, whispers of a ship that did not belong to any empire fleet, a vessel that left wrecks behind, a vessel none could name, but whose shadow was growing. The rulers did not care for whispers, they had heard many before, and all proved false. But this time there was unease, for the stories came not from smugglers or desperate slaves, but from soldiers, commanders who had seen with their own eyes colonies torn apart and patrol ships destroyed without warning. One commander spoke of a beam that split through his fleet like fire through glass. Another swore he saw a single hull shrug off weapons that had shattered planets. Still, when they came before the High Council of the Empire, their words were met with laughter. The rulers in their golden robes raised their hands and waved away the fear, declaring that no ship could stand against the might of their fleets. For their fleets numbered in the thousands, their weapons had turned stars into cinders. What was one ship against them? They spoke with arrogance, but the unease did not vanish. It sank deeper, like a thorn under the skin. Far across the stars, in the mining colonies where the Empire rarely bothered to look, fear turned into hope. Slaves who had known nothing but chains whispered to each other about a ghost ship. They said it had come for vengeance, that it was hunting the masters, and though they did not know its name, they began to give it one in their quiet prayers, Terran. The word passed like fire across the camps, Terran, a name none in the Empire had heard for ages. For the humans of Earth were forgotten. Hidden, small in number compared to the great empires, dismissed as nothing more than a minor species trapped on their homeworld. Yet somehow the whispers tied them to this new terror, and even if the slaves did not believe, they wanted to, for hope was rare, and any flame was worth holding. The Empire's fleets continued their patrols, sweeping through the void, vast armadas of steel and fire. Their ships stretched across light years, each one bristling with weapons, their commanders certain of their invincibility. But even as they marched through the stars, they began to lose ships. First it was a patrol that never returned. Then it was a trade convoy found burned to nothing. Then it was an outpost that had gone silent. The Empire said nothing. Not to their people, not to the Council. But inside their war rooms the maps began to fill with red markers. Symbols of fleets gone missing, outposts lost. And the whispers grew louder. Now even the nobles spoke of them in quiet tones. Their laughter thinner, their eyes sharper, waiting for a report that could give shape to the ghost haunting them. The council chamber itself, a vast hall of shining marble and glowing light, was heavy with unease, alien leaders in grand robes, their scaled, feathered, and furred faces all showing the same nervous glances. They demanded answers, demanded proof that the Empire still held its power. The Emperor's voice thundered back at them, assuring them that nothing had changed, that the Empire's fleets were strong, that no single ship could challenge them. Yet the truth was beginning to show cracks. For, deep in the archives, hidden records told of old wars long forgotten. When humans had first reached the stars, the Empire had fought them once, long ago, and though the records were buried, some fragments remained, records of fierce battles, of human ships that would not fall, of weapons that should not exist, and of wars that ended not with surrender but with silence. Silence as humanity vanished from the galactic stage, retreating into shadow, never to be seen again, until now. The people of the Empire did not know this history. They lived in fear of the fleets above them. But now fear was mixing with curiosity. For across the world strange signals were being caught, encrypted messages carried by unknown frequencies, pulses of sound like beating drums, and with them came sightings. Miners swore they saw a massive shape move across the stars, its hull black as night, its outline glowing with strange energy. Traders swore they saw a single ship vanish into nothing, then reappear behind an enemy, and even hardened soldiers whispered of weapons that burned silently, weapons that made no sound, yet tore through shields like paper, and though the rulers told them to be silent, the whispers would not stop, because whispers fed on fear, and the Empire's fear was growing. The first confirmed report came from the frontier, where a fleet of 20 Empire warships had been sent to deal with raiders. The fleet never returned, but a single distress call did, and in it a voice could be heard, ragged and terrified, screaming of a Terran battleship, of a ship that moved faster than thought, of armor that weapons could not break. The call ended with static, and though the Empire tried to bury it, the recording spread, leaked into the underworld, passed from smuggler to smuggler, and then to the very slaves who dreamed of freedom. And with each telling, the fear of the Empire grew weaker, while the legend of the Terran ship grew stronger, no longer a whisper, but a storm. The Emperor himself could not ignore it. He summoned his warlords, demanded an explanation, demanded proof that this was nothing but rumor. The warlords bowed, but their faces betrayed them, for they too had heard, they too had seen fleets vanish, they too had felt the unease creeping into their soldiers' hearts, and they knew that if the Empire could not crush this threat quickly, its very foundation would crumble, for empires ruled by fear. And when fear was taken from them, they had nothing left, so a decision was made. Fleets would be gathered, the largest armada in centuries, to hunt down and destroy this Terran battleship, to show the galaxy that the Empire was still eternal. But even as they prepared, there were those who wondered if such a fleet would ever return. In the outer darkness, far beyond their borders, the Terran battleship drifted silently, its hull like a shadow against the stars, its guns waiting, its engines humming with a power older and darker than anything the Empire could wield. Inside its silent halls, men and women of Earth prepared, their eyes steady, their voices calm. They had waited for this moment, waited for centuries, and now the galaxy that had laughed at them, ignored them, enslaved them, would finally remember, and in that silence the Empire's doom was already written, though they did not yet know it. The galaxy was not free. It was silent under the shadow of a single empire that had ruled for thousands of years, an empire so old that most races had forgotten a time before it. Their flags flew on every world, their fleets filled the skies, and their laws pressed on every colony that dared to grow. Their rulers believed themselves eternal, laughing at the thought that anyone could ever rise against them, for they had crushed rebellion after rebellion, and whenever a new power tried to stand, it was burned away like dust in the wind. Yet even as their fleets patrolled the stars, whispers began to flow, small and faint, spoken in the corners of markets, in the quiet of slave camps, in the lonely watches of freighters, whispers of something moving at the far edge of known space, whispers of a ship that did not belong to any Empire fleet, a vessel that left wrecks behind, a vessel none could name, but whose shadow was growing. The rulers did not care for whispers. They had heard many before, and all proved false. But this time there was unease, for the stories came not from smugglers or desperate slaves, but from soldiers, commanders who had seen with their own eyes colonies torn apart and patrol ships destroyed without warning. One commander spoke of a beam that split through his fleet like fire through glass. Another swore he saw a single hull shrug off weapons that had shattered planets. Still, when they came before the High Council of the Empire, their words were met with laughter. The rulers in their golden robes raised their hands and waved away the fear, declaring that no ship could stand against the might of their fleets. For their fleets numbered in the thousands, their weapons had turned stars into cinders. What was one ship against them? They spoke with arrogance, but the unease did not vanish. It sank deeper, like a thorn under the skin. Far across the stars, in the mining colonies where the Empire rarely bothered to look, fear turned into hope. Slaves who had known nothing but chains whispered to each other about a ghost ship. They said it had come for vengeance, that it was hunting the masters, and though they did not know its name, they began to give it one in their quiet prayers, Terran. The word passed like fire across the camps, Terran, a name none in the Empire had heard for ages. For the humans of Earth were forgotten. Hidden, small in number compared to the great empires, dismissed as nothing more than a minor species trapped on their homeworld. Yet somehow the whispers tied them to this new terror, and even if the slaves did not believe, they wanted to, for hope was rare, and any flame was worth holding. The Empire's fleets continued their patrols, sweeping through the void, vast armadas of steel and fire. Their ships stretched across light years, each one bristling with weapons, their commanders certain of their invincibility. But even as they marched through the stars, they began to lose ships. First it was a patrol that never returned. Then it was a trade convoy found burned to nothing. Then it was an outpost that had gone silent. The Empire said nothing. Not to their people, not to the Council, but inside their war rooms the maps began to fill with red markers. Symbols of fleets gone missing, outposts lost, and the whispers grew louder. Now even the nobles spoke of them in quiet tones, their laughter thinner, their eyes sharper, waiting for a report that could give shape to the ghost haunting them. The council chamber itself, a vast hall of shining marble and glowing light, was heavy with unease, alien leaders in grand robes, their scaled, feathered, and furred faces all showing the same nervous glances. They demanded answers, demanded proof that the Empire still held its power. The Emperor's voice thundered back at them, assuring them that nothing had changed, that the Empire's fleets were strong, that no single ship could challenge them. Yet the truth was beginning to show cracks. 4. Deep in the archives, hidden records told of old wars long forgotten. When humans had first reached the stars, the Empire had fought them once, long ago, and though the records were buried, some fragments remained, records of fierce battles, of human ships that would not fall, of weapons that should not exist, and of wars that ended not with surrender but with silence. Silence as humanity vanished from the galactic stage, retreating into shadow, never to be seen again, until now. The people of the Empire did not know this history. They lived in fear of the fleets above them. But now fear was mixing with curiosity. For across the world strange signals were being caught, encrypted messages carried by unknown frequencies, pulses of sound like beating drums, and with them came sightings. Miners swore they saw a massive shape move across the stars, its hull black as night, its outline glowing with strange energy. Traders swore they saw a single ship vanish into nothing, then reappear behind an enemy, and even hardened soldiers whispered of weapons that burned silently, weapons that made no sound, yet tore through shields like paper, and though the rulers told them to be silent, the whispers would not stop, because whispers fed on fear, and the Empire's fear was growing. The first confirmed report came from the frontier, where a fleet of 20 Empire warships had been sent to deal with raiders. The fleet never returned, but a single distress call did, and in it a voice could be heard, ragged and terrified, screaming of a Terran battleship, of a ship that moved faster than thought, of armor that weapons could not break. The call ended with static, and though the Empire tried to bury it, the recording spread, leaked into the underworld, passed from smuggler to smuggler, and then to the very slaves who dreamed of freedom, and with each telling, the fear of the Empire grew weaker, while the legend of the Terran ship grew stronger, no longer a whisper, but a storm. The Emperor himself could not ignore it. He summoned his warlords, demanded an explanation, demanded proof that this was nothing but rumor. The warlords bowed, but their faces betrayed them, for they too had heard, they too had seen fleets vanish, they too had felt the unease creeping into their soldiers' hearts, and they knew that if the Empire could not crush this threat quickly, its very foundation would crumble, for empires ruled by fear. And when fear was taken from them, they had nothing left, so a decision was made. Fleets would be gathered, the largest armada in centuries, to hunt down and destroy this Terran battleship, to show the galaxy that the Empire was still eternal. But even as they prepared, there were those who wondered if such a fleet would ever return. In the outer darkness, far beyond their borders, the Terran battleship drifted silently, its hull like a shadow against the stars, its guns waiting, its engines humming with a power older and darker than anything the Empire could wield. Inside its silent halls, men and women of Earth prepared, their eyes steady, their voices calm. They had waited for this moment, waited for centuries, and now the galaxy that had laughed at them, ignored them, enslaved them, would finally remember, and in that silence the Empire's doom was already written, though they did not yet know it. The night on the frontier world was calm when the first scream came through the comm. A thin sound under static, a miner begging for help, then a burst of light on the horizon and the sky turned white. The colony sensors woke and sent warnings, but the warnings arrived too late. The first defense drones rose into the air and were cut down in one silent line. The people looked up and saw nothing. Only stars, only the cold wind moving across the dust fields. Then the power failed and the city center dropped into darkness. Generators tried to start, died, tried again, died again, as if something heavy was pressing on them, like a hand closing a throat. The governor stood at the tall window and felt the glass shake in the frame. He called the garrison, heard shouting, heard boots on metal, heard the single honest word that all soldiers speak when they meet something they do not understand. Contact, that was. The first real sign, not the alarms, not the lights, but that one word, dragged out with fear. And after it came a second word that many in the Empire had not said aloud for a very long time: Terran. The garrison tried to form a line, tried to power the shield towers, tried to launch the corvettes from the skyport. But the doors would not open, the clamps would not release, every system showed green, every bar read normal. Yet nothing moved. The technicians tore open panels and found the boards cold, found the lines unbroken, found the power thick as a river in spring. But still nothing moved. It was as if the machines had decided to sleep. The captain shouted for manual overrides and men ran with tools and hand cranks and impact wrenches, and it all felt like a joke because the machines were new and the world was loyal, and none of this should be happening. Then a child pointed up and said the stars are wrong, and the mother dragged the child away because there was no time for that kind of talk. But she looked up anyway and saw that the stars really were wrong. Or maybe not the stars, maybe the space between them, a black shape moving where nothing should move, a hole sliding across the pattern of light, slow and steady, like a whale under ice, too big to see, too quiet to hear. The first shots came from the outer watchtowers, a burst of bright lances that reached into the dark. They hit something that was not there. They hit something that did not glow, did not spark, did not even blink. The gunners stared and fired again and again, and the captain told them to hold, to wait for target lock. But the sights crawled and twitched like animals afraid. The computers wrote lines of numbers that made no sense, error stacked on error, and the captain understood that they were alone. The fleet would not answer in time. The nearest station was days away. The colony was a stone in a black river, and the river had risen. In the mines the slaves felt the tremor in the deep tunnels and thought it was another cave-in. They grabbed each other, held their breath, and waited. Then a new sound came down the shaft, a heavy hum like a giant heart, slow and terrible, and some of them smiled because they had been whispering the same word for weeks, Terran, and now they believed, not because they had proof, but because belief was all they had ever owned. The overseers shouted at them to get back to work, raised their shock rods, but the rods clicked empty, the power cells dead, the lights flickered and died, the cages slid open because their locks failed, the chains fell because the magnets went cold, and in the dark the slaves did not run. They stood still and listened, as if the sound itself might tell them where to go, as if the ship in the sky was speaking in a language deeper than words. The governor ordered a broadcast to the unknown ship, voice only, open channel, no encryption. He kept his words calm and careful, spoke in the old diplomatic code that every Empire world used when meeting a stranger. This is a lawful colony of the Empire. Identify yourself and state intent. The speakers answered with a low hiss like rain on iron. Then a voice came through, not loud, not cruel, simply clear. You have taken lives under chains. You have burned free homes. You have hunted those who asked for safety. Release your prisoners, drop your weapons, stand down. The governor swallowed and tried to sound brave. He said the slaves are legal labor under imperial law. He said the garrison will defend the colony. He said if you fire on us you will face the fleet. And the voice replied in the same quiet tone. There is no law above a human life. There is no safety for those who hide behind chains. We have no argument with your people, only with your masters. Stand down. And the channel clicked silent. In orbit, the invisible shape grew clearer, not to the naked eye, but to simple things, to dust, to weak gravity waves, to heat that bent a fraction in the cold. It was not a myth or a trick now. It was a source, a heavy center in the night, and the colony's last corvette, freed by a manual cut to the clamps, roared into the sky with a crew of volunteers, young and old, afraid and stubborn. They rose through the thin clouds like a stone thrown by a desperate hand. They locked their weapons and armed their last missile. They never saw their target. They only felt the targeting system go blind, as if a curtain had fallen across their eyes. The pilot swore and switched to manual. The gunner aimed by instinct, fired a long burst where his fear told him the enemy was. The burst vanished, not blocked, not deflected, just swallowed, and the corvette began to tumble, not hit, not burned, simply given a small push from a force they could not measure. The pilot fought the spin and steadied the ship, and then every light in the cabin turned white and a soft tone sounded and the corvette drifted as the engines wound down, gentle as sleep. On the ground the shield towers finally woke. A pulse ran through the city and the domes rose with a beautiful shimmer. The people cheered, the governor exhaled. The captain smiled for the first time that night. Then the shimmer bent, not broken, not shattered, but folded, like silk in careful hands, and the dome sank to the ground and lay there like a glass blanket, still whole, unusable. The captain cursed softly and whispered a question to no one. "What kind of ship is this?" And an old technician with grey hands answered without looking up, "A Terran ship," and the way he said it made everyone near him stop talking. A low shape came down through the night, not a fighter, not a bomber, a shuttle, black and simple, no emblems, no flags. It landed outside the city walls with care, like someone setting down a cup in a quiet room. The garrison aimed every rifle and every cannon at it. Fingers shaking on triggers, and the shuttle door opened, a ramp lowered, and 3 figures walked out in plain armor without marks, helmets smooth, movements patient. They did not raise weapons because they were not carrying any. They walked to the gate and stopped and waited, and the waiting was louder than any shot. The governor told the captain to capture them. The captain ordered a squad to advance. The squad moved a few steps and stopped without meaning to stop, as if their bodies had understood something their minds had not. The 3 figures did nothing, said nothing, and after a long minute one of them raised a hand, a simple greeting, open palm, not a threat. For a strange moment the captain thought of old stories told by pilgrims, stories of people who crossed deserts and saluted the sun, and he did not know why his throat felt tight. In the mines the slaves moved toward the surface in a steady river, not running, not rioting, simply walking. The overseers tried to stand in the way, then stepped aside because the rods were dead and their courage was borrowed. Outside the tunnels they saw the shuttle and the 3 figures, and a whisper moved through the crowd like wind through leaves. Human. The word hung there, half hope, half fear, because some had never seen a human, only heard of them. Some had been told humans were devils, some had been told humans were myths, and now here they were, small against the size of the sky, yet somehow heavy as mountains. The governor tried one more time, opened a private channel and asked the ship to negotiate, said he would release a portion of the labor, said he would sign a pledge to improve conditions, said many things that sounded reasonable in his own ears, and the voice replied, "Release them all, now," and the governor felt a hot anger rise because he was still a lord in his own mind. He shouted that the Empire would crush Earth, that the fleets would erase the human world, that this ship would be a small note in the long song of his people. And the voice said a single sentence that chilled the room, "We are not here to sing." The captain watched the 3 figures, raised his hand, and let it fall, a signal to fire. A choice made out of fear and pride. The guns spoke, a hard thunder rolling across the field, bright lines racing toward the 3 figures, and the lines bent, not broken, not stopped, simply curved away as if the air had turned into a river around them. The shots burned harmlessly into the dust. The 3 did not move, and the men behind the guns lowered their heads because something inside them had changed. The shape of the night had shifted, and they knew they were not soldiers in that moment. They were witnesses. A 4th figure walked down the ramp with slow steps, no helmet, a human face calm and tired and steady, the eyes of someone who had seen long darkness and walked through it. This person spoke in the common tongue, soft and clear. "This is not a war for us. This is a rescue. Open your gates, let them out, and we will leave. Refuse, and we will still take them. But there will be more pain. Choose." The governor felt the eyes of his city on him, felt the weight of his own guards, felt the shame of a dozen lies. He looked at the slaves and saw people, not numbers, and that made him angrier, because he did not want to feel that. He wanted to feel strong. So he shouted no, and the human nodded once, as if the answer had been expected, as if the night was a story already read. The ground shook, not from shells, not from bombs, from sound. A deep note rolled across the plain. The sky rippled. The invisible shape above them showed its edges. Light caught on lines that should not have been there, angles that made the eye slip. The Terran Battleship did not appear fully. It only let the world know it existed, and in that knowledge the locks on every cage opened, the bolts on every door slid back. The collars around every neck fell with small soft clicks. The slaves stood there with hands to their throats and could not speak for a long breath. Then a low cry rose, not a cheer, not a roar, a simple sound of relief, a sound older than empires, the sound of a chain breaking. The captain dropped his rifle and raised both hands, palm out, and told his men to stand down. Voices on the command net screamed at him to fire, to fight, to die well. But the men did not move, because dying well was a story told by rich men who had never had to do it themselves. And these men had families in the city behind them, and they knew beyond doubt that firing would change nothing but the number of graves. So they chose to live and to open the gate. The 3 armored figures walked in, calm as rain, not pushing, not shouting, simply guiding, showing paths, helping old hands up steps, lifting children, steadying the weak, and the crowd flowed past the stunned guards and into the open ground beyond the walls. And if anyone looked up they saw the stars were right again, not because the Terran ship had gone, but because fear had shifted from the people on the ground to the Empire far away. That fear would travel along every comm line, creep into every council chamber, haunt every war room, because a single colony had been emptied of chains in one night, and no Imperial fleet had stopped it. Dawn found the colony quiet, the mines empty, the barracks still, the governor's office chair turned toward the window where the light came in, dust hanging in the air like tired snow. The Terran shuttle rose and joined the dark shape in the sky, and then even that shadow was gone, not with a jump flash, not with a roar, simply gone, like a thought leaving a mind, and the survivors stood together in the pale light and tried to understand what had happened. Some wept, some laughed, some simply sat down because their legs would not hold them, and in that stillness a new whisper began, not of fear this time, of memory. They would tell others what they had seen. They would bind the story to their lives. They would say that a Terran battleship had come and asked for a choice and the choice had been made and chains had fallen. And that whisper would grow into a rumor, and the rumor would harden into a fact, and the fact would become a warning that carried across the stars. They ruled the galaxy, but something had arrived that did not care for their flags or their laws or their pride. Something that spoke softly and broke iron without anger. Something that would not be turned aside by pain or threats, and every emperor who heard it would feel a small cold place open in his heart and would know the truth he had always feared. Power is only real until someone stronger arrives and asks a simple question. Why? The Galactic Council's chamber was a place built to impress, a hall so large that voices echoed for minutes before fading, with crystal pillars that rose like frozen lightning, banners of every great species hanging high above, glowing with color and pride. But on this day pride was thin, fear was thicker, rulers and envoys filled the seats, whispering, staring at the central dais where the High Lord of the Empire stood, his cloak bright with gold, his voice heavy with command. He raised his hands for silence, yet silence was already there, broken only by the restless breathing of nervous leaders. Reports had come in, reports no one wanted to read aloud, fleets missing, colonies destroyed, distress calls cut short, and every report had the same word hidden inside it, Terran. The first counselor from the winged Carthy people rose and shouted that the Empire must explain. Their colonies had been struck, their citizens dead, and yet no warning had been given. His feathers shook with anger as he demanded answers. The High Lord sneered, calling him a coward who trembled at shadows. But even as he spoke, more voices rose, different species, different worlds, all shouting the same question, what is this ship? The chamber filled with sound until the Emperor struck the ground with his staff, the booming echo rolling like thunder. But the thunder did not erase the fear. In the corners, aides and scribes whispered among themselves, remembering old stories buried deep, stories of humans, stories of a war long past when Earth had faced the Empire and had not fallen easily. But such stories had always been called lies, old myths. Now they did not seem so false. The Council demanded evidence, and the Empire gave it. A recording pulled from the black box of a dying corvette. A short, ragged scream, a warning that a Terran battleship had appeared, then static, then silence. The chamber grew colder, leaders shifted in their seats. Some muttered prayers to forgotten gods. Others tried to laugh but their voices cracked. One elder of the scaled heroine leaned forward and whispered, "If this is only one ship, what happens when more come?" The question cut through the room like a blade, for no one had asked it before, but everyone had thought it. The Empire tried to regain control, declaring that they would assemble a grand fleet, thousands of ships, to hunt down and destroy this Terran ghost. But the words rang hollow, because the Empire had already sent fleets, and those fleets had not returned. The councillors knew it, the people outside the chamber knew it. Rumors were racing faster than ships, spreading from world to world, that the Terrans had returned, that the chains of the Empire would soon break, and the very slaves who built the Council's shining hall were whispering the same word in their barracks at night, Terran. The High Lord thundered about loyalty, about obedience, about fear of the Empire's wrath. But for the first time his voice did not seem eternal. For the first time leaders dared to look at him not with awe, but with doubt, and doubt is more dangerous than any weapon. As the debate grew loud again, a sudden silence fell, not from the staff, not from command, but from the sound of a new transmission filling the chamber, a signal piercing through every defense, every shield, every jammer. It was a voice, calm and steady, speaking in the common tongue of the stars. This is not your galaxy alone. Your time of rule ends. Stand down, or you will be stood down. The words were simple, without anger, yet the walls of the chamber seemed to shake with them, and every leader in that hall felt the same truth at once. The Empire was not unchallenged anymore. The order went out with the speed of panic, and within days the largest Imperial armada in centuries was assembled, drawn from dozens of sectors, pulled from patrols, stripped from colonies, leaving worlds unguarded so that this one show of force could be built. Because the Empire could not afford to look weak, not before the Council, not before the galaxy, not before their own people. Hundreds of ships, then thousands, poured into the void, carriers heavy with fighters, cruisers armed with star-breaking cannons, dreadnoughts whose hulls gleamed like molten suns. They filled the black with their confidence, banners bright, weapons hot, a storm of firepower meant to crush a rumor. Commanders gave speeches about destiny, about the glory of the Empire, about how this Terran ghost would vanish like all others before it. Their voices were steady, but their eyes betrayed the truth. No one had ever seen an empire this desperate to prove its strength. In the great flagship's war room, maps glittered with stars and red arrows, the fleet moving as one, a tide of power surging toward the sector where the whispers had begun. Captains exchanged nervous jokes, but the laughter fell flat. Scouts ran ahead, probes launched into the dark, but most went silent, no feedback, no wreckage, just silence, as though the void itself was swallowing them. Still, the admirals pressed forward, convinced that numbers alone would be their shield. After all, how could one ship, even if it were Terran, stand against 10,000? The first contact came without warning. A forward wing of 50 cruisers reported a shadow crossing their path. Sensors failed, comms flickered, and then all channels were filled with static. A minute later, only wreckage floated where the wing had been. The admirals barked orders, ships shifted formation, weapons primed, but no target appeared. Then another wing, on the opposite flank, vanished in the same way, one moment full, the next moment gone, reduced to burning fragments spinning through the void. Fear crept through the fleet, men and women stared at their screens, searching for something, anything, but the maps showed only empty black. And then it appeared. Not as a blur, not as a streak, not as a flash of light, but as a shadow sliding slowly out of the dark, vast, silent, patient. The Terran Battleship. Its armor was blacker than space, its edges wrong, as though it bent the light around it. No banners, no emblems, only a hull carved with scars of old battles, glowing faintly with lines of strange energy. Compared to it, the Empire's dreadnoughts looked fragile, their golden hulls nothing but ornaments in a storm. The admirals froze, staring, and for a heartbeat the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the fleet fired. Tens of thousands of beams cut across the void, missiles swarmed, plasma rivers burned toward the shadow. The black ship did not move. The storm struck, lit the darkness in blinding white, shook the heavens with power enough to tear worlds apart. And when the light faded, the Terran ship was still there, untouched, its armor gleaming with a faint glow like the surface of calm water. Gasps filled the command decks, soldiers stared at screens, and one whispered the words that many had already thought, "It can't be real." The Terran ship moved then, slowly, almost lazily, as if it had no reason to hurry. A single flash pulsed from its hull, no louder than a sigh, and an entire squadron of battleships simply broke apart, clean and silent, as if cut by an invisible blade. Another pulse, and a carrier exploded in a fireball, its fighters scattering like sparks. The fleet panicked, formations collapsed, orders drowned in screams. Admirals shouted for retreat, captains begged for mercy, but the Terran ship gave no answer, only steady, unstoppable destruction. Hours later, the void was silent again. Wreckage drifted, flames flickered out, bodies and steel floated together. A graveyard spread across the stars. Of the great armada, nothing remained but fragments. The Terran battleship drifted alone among the ruins, its weapons cooling, its engines quiet, as if nothing had happened. Then, with a silent twist of light, it vanished into the dark, leaving only fear behind. News of the massacre reached the council before the wreckage had even cooled. Words like impossible, unstoppable, and Terran spread like fire through every chamber, every port, every home. The Empire had sent its mightiest fleet, and it had not returned. No one laughed now. The whispers had become truth, and the truth was more terrifying than any myth. Humanity had returned, and with a single ship, they had humbled the masters of the galaxy. The wreckage still drifted when the first scouts dared return, broken ships glowing faintly as they tumbled through the black, fragments of hulls that had once carried the Empire's banners now nothing but cold metal graves, frozen bodies turning slowly among them. The reports came back like knives to the Council's pride. The Great Armada, the largest in centuries, had not just been defeated, it had been erased. Thousands of ships sent into the void, and only silence had come back. There was no glorious battle, no heroic stand, no defiance remembered. Only destruction swift and certain. The galaxy whispered of it as though it were a curse, as though even speaking of the Terran Battleship too loudly might summon it. On frontier worlds, miners swore they saw it against the light of dead stars, silent and black, like a predator stalking the void. Traders told of their scanners failing, their compasses spinning, and then of a shadow sliding past their hull, massive and patient, as if it were studying them before letting them go. Smugglers, who trusted no one, spoke of a strange signal, a low hum like the pulse of a giant heart, and when they followed it, they saw wreckage, always wreckage, never survivors. The stories spread faster than the Empire could bury them, faster than the governors could deny them, because fear always runs quicker than lies. The Council demanded proof, demanded to see what kind of monster could do this. So at last, fragments of data were shown. A grainy recording from a destroyed outpost flickered across the chamber walls. At first it was nothing but darkness, then the image shifted and there it was, the Terran Battleship. A shape vast and wrong, blacker than the void itself, its armor marked with scars that glowed faintly like old embers. The chamber fell silent. Leaders who had never bowed to anyone felt their throats tighten. Compared to that ship, their own dreadnoughts looked small, fragile, like toys meant for children. The alien empires that had laughed at humanity's name now realized why the whispers had returned. On one world, soldiers stationed at a lonely watchtower watched as the Terran battleship slid past a dying sun. Its shadow fell across their entire planet for a moment, blotting out the light. The commander of the outpost called for weapons to fire, but nothing moved. The guns were frozen, the power silent, the systems locked. And then the ship turned its hull, and for the first time they saw its eyes, rows of weapons glowing faintly like coals waiting for a breath of wind. Yet it did not fire. It simply drifted past, leaving them trembling, alive but shaken, as though it had spared them not out of mercy, but because they were not worth notice. That insult cut deeper than any weapon. Whispers of rebellion began to grow stronger. If the Empire could be defeated, if its fleets could fall, then why should anyone bow to it? In the slave camps, the word Terran was no longer a whisper. It was a chant, a song, passed from mouth to mouth, a fire burning in the dark. Some began to believe the Terrans had returned not just to fight the Empire, but to free the galaxy. Others feared that humanity's return would bring something even worse, for if this was only one ship, how many more waited behind it? The question haunted every world, every council chamber, every war room. The Empire's rulers gathered again, faces pale, voices sharp. They spoke of revenge, of another fleet, of new weapons, but the fear in their eyes betrayed them. They had seen the same recording as everyone else. They had watched their greatest armada vanish. They had heard the survivors whisper the same phrase, "We never saw it fire more than once." The implication chilled them. If the Terran battleship could destroy thousands with only a handful of strikes, then what else was it hiding? What power had humanity been building in the shadows all these years? And in the dark of space, the Terran ship continued its silent path. It did not conquer, it did not announce itself, it did not raise a flag. It simply appeared where it wished, struck when it chose, and then vanished again. Every Empire fleet that tried to stop it was left broken. Every commander who swore to defeat it fell silent. And in its wake, the galaxy trembled. For the first time in 1,000 years, the stars no longer belonged to the Empire. They belonged to something else, something old, something patient, something human. The Empire was wounded, but it did not admit it, not in front of its people, not in front of the Council. Pride kept its voice strong, though fear had already hollowed its heart. Decrees went out across the stars, new fleets were promised, new weapons were built. Speeches thundered in marble halls about how the Empire would rise stronger than before. But in the streets, in the markets, in the mines and barracks, no one believed. The people had seen the wreckage of 1,000 ships drifting, had heard the voices of survivors whispering about a single Terran warship, and lies could not bury truth when truth hung above every world like a shadow. On the frontier, patrol ships flew with nervous eyes, scanning every dark shape, every cold asteroid, wondering if it hid the Terran battleship. Soldiers kept their hands near the triggers, captains slept in their chairs, commanders shouted at their crews to stay alert, but vigilance could not stop fear. Entire colonies begged for stronger defenses, but the Empire could not send them, for most of its fleets were gone, swallowed by the void. In the absence of protection, something else began to grow: rebellion. Small at first, a slave camp that refused to work, a governor's palace burned in the night, an imperial officer found dead in his chambers. The Empire punished these sparks with brutal force, but the more it punished, the more sparks rose, like dry grass catching fire. Meanwhile, the Terran Battleship did not speak. It did not send messages of conquest. It did not raise flags of war. It appeared without warning, lingered like a ghost, and left behind only wreckage. In one system, it drifted close to a refueling station, and every system shut down without a shot fired, lights flickering until the station was cold and helpless. The Terran ship did not destroy it. It simply turned and left, as though mocking the Empire, as though reminding them that it could end them at any moment but chose not to. That silence was more terrifying than open fire. A foe who kills is feared. A foe who waits is worshipped as death itself. In the council chambers, panic turned to anger. One lord demanded that humanity be erased completely, that Earth itself be burned to ash. Another warned against such madness, pointing out that if this was only one ship, then surely there were more, hidden, waiting, and if they destroyed Earth, those ships would come. Voices rose, accusations flew. Species that had once stood united under the Empire began to argue openly. The Emperor struck the floor with his staff again and again, shouting for silence, but each strike sounded weaker than the last, because authority is not made of gold or marble. It is made of fear, and fear was now running away from the Empire and toward the Terrans. The slaves whispered louder. They spoke not of if, but of when. When would the Terrans arrive? When would they come to break the chains? They carved the word Terran into walls, into tables, into the dirt beneath their feet. To them, the Terran battleship was not just a weapon, it was a promise. A promise that the Empire's rule was ending. The overseers beat them for it, but beating only spread the whispers further, because every strike of the rod was met with the same thought. Soon these rods would fall forever. On one world, an imperial governor stood on his balcony as the sky burned. A rebellion had taken the city. The people rose with knives, with stolen rifles, with nothing but desperation in their eyes. The governor ordered his guards to fire, and they did, but then the air trembled with a deep hum, and the city froze. Above them, blotting out the stars, the Terran battleship appeared, silent, black, vast. The governor fell to his knees, his guards lowered their weapons, and the people screamed with joy, for they believed deliverance had come. But the ship did not fire. It only hovered, watching. And when it drifted away into the dark, the people rose again, stronger, burning the banners of the Empire, swearing never to kneel again. The Terrans had not freed them, but the sight alone had given them freedom. The Emperor raged when he heard this. He cursed the Terrans as cowards who would not fight openly, as shadows who struck and ran, but even he knew the truth. Humanity had chosen its war carefully. They did not need to conquer with armies. They only needed one ship, a ship strong enough to break fleets, silent enough to sow terror, patient enough to let the Empire collapse from within. And collapse was already beginning. Worlds were slipping from the Empire's grasp, rebellions spreading like cracks in a glass. The Council demanded unity, demanded obedience, but in their own private chambers, lords and leaders asked the same question in fear. If this is one ship, what happens when the others arrive? And deep in the darkness, far from any star, the Terran Battleship waited. Inside its steel heart, men and women stood at their stations, calm and steady. They watched the Empire crumble piece by piece. They did not rush. They did not need to. For they knew the truth. The galaxy already belonged to them. The Empire just had not realized it yet. The rebellion did not begin with fire, it began with silence. Whole outposts stopped answering Imperial calls. Governors who once sent long reports now sent nothing. Supply convoys vanished into the void without a single distress signal. At first, the Empire told itself these were accidents. Raiders, pirates, bad luck. But then the silence spread, system to system, until the Empire realized that silence was no accident. It was resistance. On the frontier, soldiers who had once worn the Empire's crest tore it from their uniforms. Some deserted, some hid, but many stayed where they were and refused to obey. The Terrans are watching, they whispered to one another. If we stand against the Empire, they will not let us fall. That belief spread faster than any order, faster than any law. On slave worlds, workers dropped their tools and walked away, not running, not begging, simply walking. Overseers raised their rods, but the rods sparked and died in their hands. The slaves did not even cheer. They just looked up at the night sky, waiting for the shadow they knew would come. The Empire tried to answer with terror. They sent fleets to burn rebellious cities, to crush uprisings, to show the galaxy that their hand was still iron. And sometimes they succeeded. Fires rose, blood was spilled, rebels were hanged in the squares. But in every system where the Empire's banners flew again, the victory was thin. Because within days, the Terran Battleship appeared. It did not always fire. Often, it only drifted above the world, silent, immense, casting its shadow across the land. And that shadow was enough. Soldiers dropped their rifles. Colonists tore down the Empire's flags. Rebels stood tall again, unafraid. One ship had become a fleet in the minds of billions. In the council chamber, the panic turned into desperation. The lords of the Empire screamed at each other, their robes of silk and gold now wrinkled with sweat. Some demanded peace talks, to beg the Terrans for mercy. Others shouted for total war, to scorch every human world before more ships could appear. But no decision brought unity, only more shouting, more fear. Old rivalries flared between species, each blaming the other for weakness. Where once the Council had been a symbol of Empire's strength, now it was nothing but a cage filled with frightened voices. The Emperor struck the floor with his staff again and again, but each strike echoed hollow. He commanded another grand fleet, though fewer ships answered the call this time. Too many captains had deserted, too many worlds refused to send soldiers, too many crews whispered about Terrans in the dark. The fleet that formed was smaller, weaker, hesitant. Even before they left port, rumors spread among them. "We are not being sent to fight," one captain muttered. "We are being sent to die." And in the dark, the Terran Battleship listened. One night, above a world rich with rebellion, the Terran ship finally spoke. Its voice rolled across every comm, every frequency, every channel, so that no one could pretend they had not heard. The voice was calm, steady, patient. "We are not conquerors. We are not tyrants. We are human. You built an empire on chains, and we do not allow chains. Choose now, stand free, or fall with your masters." The message was short, but it spread like fire. Whole populations rose the next morning, throwing off their shackles, burning their oaths to the Empire. The rebels no longer fought for survival. They fought with certainty, because they believed the Terrans were behind them. The Empire tried to answer with fear, but fear no longer belonged to them. Fear now belonged to the shadow in the stars. And as the uprisings turned into full-scale rebellion, one truth spread across the galaxy. This was no longer the Empire's war to win. It was humanity's war to finish. The second Grand Fleet gathered in silence. It was not like the first one, with banners bright and speeches proud. This time the docks were quiet, the crews nervous, the captains grim. They knew what had happened to the first armada, how thousands of ships had vanished without even wounding the Terran Battleship. Still, the Emperor demanded another show of power. Pride blinded him, pride chained him, and pride would be his undoing. Orders went out. Ships fueled, weapons armed, formations drawn. But beneath it all, everyone whispered the same truth. They were marching into the dark to die. When the fleet launched, it filled the void with light, engines burning like a river of stars. They stretched across systems, dreadnoughts, carriers, cruisers, and smaller ships escorting them. It should have been unstoppable, a wall of steel and fire. But the Terran Battleship was already waiting. It slid out of shadow near a broken moon, silent, patient, a single black silhouette against the galaxy. Compared to the endless armada, it looked small. But none who saw it believed that. To them it looked larger than the fleet itself, a predator facing a herd already trembling. The admirals barked orders. Shields rose, weapons locked, fighters launched. They swore they would not make the same mistakes as before. They would overwhelm it with numbers, surround it, strike together. And so, the fleet closed in from every direction, a sphere of firepower, thousands of guns ready to burn one ship from existence. For a moment, even the soldiers felt hope. Even the admirals thought victory might be theirs. The Terran ship did not move. It simply hovered, letting the sphere close around it, letting the noose tighten. And then a voice rolled across every comm channel. Not shouting, not angry, just calm and cold. You do not learn. The fleet fired. Thousands of beams and missiles tore across the void, filling space with white light. The glare blinded senses, burned eyes, shook hulls with its fury. And when the light faded, the Terran Battleship was still there. Not a scar, not a flicker. Its armor glowed faintly, as if feeding on the fire poured against it. Silence filled the comms. Soldiers stared at their screens in horror. One captain whispered, "We cannot kill it." The battleship moved then. Not fast, not violent, only steady, as if it had no reason to hurry. Its weapons lit one by one, glowing like stars waking from sleep. A single pulse reached out, and an entire carrier cracked in half, spilling its fighters into the void. Another beam swept through a cluster of cruisers, leaving them drifting and hollow. Every shot was precise, perfect, devastating. Where the first fleet had been destroyed in a storm, this one was dismantled piece by piece, as if the Terrans were proving a point. We can take you apart whenever we choose. The admirals screamed for retreat. Some ships tried to run, engines flaring, but space itself bent around them. Systems failed, compasses spun. No matter how far they flew, they always found themselves staring at the shadow in the void. The Terran ship did not let them escape. It herded them like prey, showing that their lives were not theirs too. Command. One admiral, broken with fear, begged for mercy across the open channel. The Terran voice answered softly, "We are not here for you. We are here for the chains you protect." And then his ship was gone, dissolved in silence. When the slaughter ended, only fragments of the fleet remained. Wreckage drifted, burning faintly in the dark. A few crippled ships were allowed to survive, limping back to Imperial space. They carried no victory, only fear. They carried a message, clear as any broadcast. The Empire could no longer defend itself. Its power was broken, its fleets reduced to ash. One ship had undone 1,000 years of rule. In the council chambers, despair reigned. Lords argued no longer. They shouted of surrender, of betrayal, of abandoning the Emperor himself. Some called for peace with the Terrans, others for rebellion against their own empire. The chamber once filled with order now rang with chaos. And above them all, the people whispered louder than ever. The Terrans are coming. The Terrans are here. The Emperor sat in silence. His golden robes no longer looked like power, only weight. He had built his reign on fear. Now fear had turned against him. For the first time in centuries, he realized the truth. His empire was already dead. The Terrans had not killed it. They had only revealed what was always waiting. And in the dark of the galaxy, the shadow of the battleship drifted on, patient, watching, as if it knew that the final act had only just begun.